With the third Crescent City book coming out this month, I feel the need to recap all of the books that Sarah J Maas has out in the Throne of Glass series, the A Court of Thorns and Roses series, and the Crescent City series. There's clearly some stuff that's going to be overlapping between these universes in the upcoming book, and if you're like me, it has literally been like 10 years since you've read some of those books. So a recap is going to be necessary to be able to actually catch everything that's going to be going on in the new installment. Disclaimer, if you have not read every single Sarah J Maas book, excluding the Catwoman book, there are going to be spoilers in this video. I do not want to be the person that spoils it for you, so please go read them before you read Crescent City. We're going to go through each book in each series and recap the most important parts. That way we will be all caught up before Crescent City 3, A House of Flame and Shadow releases. We'll also briefly touch on potential family relationships that run through the 3 series. Spoiler alert, I don't think that Rune, Dorian, and Rhysand are actually related. We'll also touch on points where we might have seen the characters from each of the series in each other's series. So buckle in, because we're going to start with the first Throne of Glass book that came out back in 2012. This is when we meet Celaena Sardothian, an 18-year-old assassin serving a sentence in the salt mines of Andovier. Dorian, the prince of the entire kingdom, offers her a chance to compete to become the king's champion, which would eventually lead to her freedom. During this time, she meets Kale, who is the captain of the king's guard. This is her first love triangle that is a complete fake out. Her other competitors trying to become the king's champion start to turn up dead under mysterious circumstances, and so she has her suspicions of who it is, and she's trying to figure out who would know how to use word marks, because that's what is usually showing up with the dead bodies, and word marks are sort of magic, which is outlawed in the kingdom at this point. Beyond becoming friends with Dorian and Kale, she also becomes friends with Nehemia. At the end, Celaena ends up facing off with Cain, her other main competitor, to become the king's champion. She wins the role of king's champion even though she hates the king, and throughout the book we sort of get these glimpses that there is something more to her backstory that we're not really privy to yet. Crown of Midnight. Even though she's out, supposed to be doing all of these missions, she is secretly sabotaging everything. And during this time, she finds out that the king is planning to take over other nations using dark magic. At this point in the story, we think that Kale and Celaena are a couple until Nehemia, the princess that she was a really close friend with, brutally murdered. It's in this book that we find out that Celaena is actually Aelin, the lost princess of Terrasen. Also, some of her Fae abilities start to show through in this book. Celaena also uncovers that the way the king is using dark magic is by using word keys, and the king sends her off on a mission to Wendelin, and it's right before she leaves that she finds Nehemia's body and then actually tries to stab Kale. At this point, I was still Team Dorian, so I was sort of okay with that situation. In Heir of Fire, Celaena, who we have now officially renamed as Aelin, Aelin meets Rowan, our actual love interest of this series, who is an ancient Fae warrior bound to Maeve, who we, at the time, believe is the Fae Queen of Doranel. Rowan ends up training Celaena, even though they are more than like mentor and mentee. It's sort of a partnership situation. I don't know if it's the same as a mate bond, or if this is a separate warriors only, kind of like a parabatai sort of thing from the Cassandra Clare universe. But he's really pushing Aelin to harness her Fae abilities, because right now she can hardly access them, and then when she can, they're not reliable. This is also the book where Dorian begins to get some of his power. Aelin ends up confronting Maeve for a little bit and asking sort of about the word keys and what the King of Adarlan is up to. If I remember correctly, we did not get like that many answers, but she sort of does learn more about how Terrasen actually fell. I think this is when she finds out that her mentor, like the assassin mentor, Aberin, the assassin's blade, is the novella Bind Up. She released a lot of the novellas in 2012, right after she released Throne of Glass, but the Bind Up didn't come out until 2014, right around where Heir of Fire came out. So I think that's when I read it, and I personally think that is a great time to read it. You've made it through the first 3 books, so you really understand who Celaena is and how, and why her becoming Celaena instead of continuing to be Aelin was important in what went on behind the scenes there. And I think if I'd read it before, it just wouldn't have hit as hard. There are 5 novellas in this. So there's the Assassin and the Pirate Lord, the Assassin and the Healer, the Assassin in the Desert, the Assassin in the Underworld, and then the Assassin in the Empire. In the Assassin and the Healer, we actually meet Irene. She's a young healer who really wants to make it to the Torre, which is where all the healers study. It's on a completely different continent. And Selena ends up protecting her from being attacked and then gives her the money that she needs to get to the Torre. Now, we don't see her again until Tower of Dawn when she heals Kale. Which, I don't know. I don't know how much of this Sarah knew when she was writing that novella, or if later she was like, oh, we need a healer, why not bring in this girl? But when we saw her again in Tower of Dawn, I was like, oh my gosh, it's that girl. The Assassin in the Empire novella had destroyed me emotionally. This is obviously when we start Throne of Glass, we see Selena imprisoned in a salt mine. So something went wrong to get her there. And this is the story of that happening. And she and Sam finally get together for them to go on this last mission. I forgot exactly what happened. All I remember is the ending where we find Sam dead. And not just dead, like brutally cut up and tortured. Like she finally fell in love with the guy and then he gets killed in a horrible way. In Queen of Shadows, we really see Aelin sort of in full force and really accepting that part of her identity. This is the book where Dorian also becomes possessed by a Valg with the freaking collar. And we also see a little bit more of Manon and the witches. Right now, she's still, I think, under control of her grandmother, who's like the main Blackbeak witch. But Manon sort of is having these feelings of like, is this good? Not necessarily that she's worried about doing the right thing. I feel like Manon's totally fine with operating in a morally gray area. But the fact that she's questioning the orders she's getting from her grandmother at all is sort of a red flag to her grandmother, at least. In Empire of Storms, we get to meet one of my favorite characters of the entire series, Alede. She has a message to deliver to Aelin, and on the way she runs into Lorcan, another Fae warrior that is part of the cadre that Rowan was in, and they all serve Maeve. We get a lot more of the witches in this book, and Manon, I know she discovers her true heritage, like who she's descended from, but I can't remember. Obviously, like her father was human, but there's something about her that unites all 3 bloodlines. Like she's not pure Blackbeak, I think. I wish I could remember, but I have a feeling that her grandmother killed her mother. If you've ended up here and you haven't read Tower of Dawn, very important. Need to read. I wish I could remember how Kale ends up in a wheelchair, but I don't. I think it's some sort of magical issue, but it's from an injury from Queen of Shadows. And so he ends up going to the southern continent to go to the Torre to get healed. This is where we run into Irene again. This is also when Kale's sort of in a relationship with Nesrin, and it just feels really awkward and uncomfortable. I felt like they sort of, I don't know, were together out of convenience, maybe. We get a lot of information about Valg in this, and I think this is the book where we realize that Maeve is Valg. I don't think we actually know that yet. And by the end of the book, Kale is able to walk, but I think it's he and Irene to heal him all the way. He and Irene had to form this sort of pact where if one of them dies, the other one does too, which we see the same type of pact in ACOTAR between Rhys and Feyre. But Kale is back to his almost full strength, and they're headed to go find Aelin. Kingdom of Ash is brutal. That's the only word for it. Because Maeve has Aelin and she is repeatedly having her tortured and then healed and then so that she can be tortured again. And she's getting into her brain and trying to mess with her memories and make her think that Maeve is like Aelin's aunt and that she wants to give her all of this information that she has. And meanwhile, it's just Maeve doing all of these mind games. By the time we get everyone all together at the end and Aelin is facing off against Maeve and Erewhon and she has all of this power, we have like the whole girl gang. We have that girl who is from the Red Desert, the warrior, and then we have Irene, Lysandra. We have the princess who we kind of hate from the Coggin, but she's, she turned it around for this. We have this huge girl gang from like the entire series. It's the best moment ever. And they're fighting people in like the last stronghold that they have. I think it's at Kale's dad's Alice? Question mark. Also, Irene is pregnant. It's really hard to summarize the end because so much happened. But Irene ends up healing Erewhon from the Valve demon, and that's how we take him out. And then does Aelin take out Maeve? I mean, I'm guessing so. And then they end up sealing the final word gate, which locks Maeve out of their universe. And that's the Throne of Glass series. Let's move on to ACOTAR. Feyre is a 19-year-old supporting her whole family who used to be rich, but now she has to hunt for them to survive, and she ends up killing a wolf who she doesn't realize is a fairy. This is Tamlin, reminder that he is stuck in a mask because of the curse. Feyre is living in the Spring Court. She doesn't know that the reason she's there is because Tamlin is trying to make her fall in love with him, because if he can get her to fall in love with him, then the curse on his entire land is going to be lifted. Feyre ends up solving the riddle, but because Amarantha is annoyed at that, she kills Feyre, and then all of the other High Lords have to give her a little drop of their power to bring her back, and she ends up becoming Fae. While she's in the trials and she's injured, she makes a deal with him that if he heals her, she will spend 2 weeks of every month with him for the rest of her life. A Court of Mist and Fury. Feyre is obviously traumatized. When she is in the Spring Court, Tamlin is like super overprotective, but when she's in the Night Court, she sort of has a different type of freedom, and Rhysand is trying to get her to learn how to read, and he's trying to get her to eat more because she's basically like unable to eat because she's so upset all the time. And she gets to meet all of Rhysand's family / friends, so Asriel, Cassian Moore, and Amren. Tamlin doesn't want Feyre to train the powers that she got at the end of ACOTAR, those little drops of power from each of the High Lords. This is where we find out a little bit more about the King of Hybern and the cauldron that he has. He wants to destroy the wall between humans and Fae to take over the humans. Feyre and Rhysand eventually fall in love, and she chooses to stay in the Night Court, but Tamlin decides to ally with Hybern to get Feyre back. When the King of Hybern wins the end battle at the end of this book, Tamlin is standing there, and he basically takes Feyre back, another controlling issue. And Feyre sort of pretends that she was in a trance this whole time, that Rhysand had been manipulating her or whatever, but right when she leaves and everyone's super confused, Rhysand's like, haha, she's actually going to be a spy in the Spring Court for us. A Court of War and Ruin. Feyre's being a spy and trying to learn how to weaken Tamlin's court because Tamlin is still allied with King Hybern. Eventually, Feyre does go back to the Night Court, and they try to start allying with other High Lords across the different courts. At the end of the last book, that was when Nesta and Elaine also become Fae. Elaine is actually the one to end up killing Hybern, because Hybern ends up killing their dad, who at least tried to come in at the final minute to be there for his daughters. A Court of Frost and Starlight is the Christmas special. We see Feyre sort of healing and getting back into art after being unable to create art for a really long time. It almost feels like an end of Feyre's storyline, like she's going to become a secondary character, but it also does like hint that she is pregnant, which ends up being a big part of the plot in the next book. It's just we don't see from her POV anymore, I don't think. A Court of Silver Flames is all about Nesta's story. So we're going back and forth between Nesta and her love interest, Cassian. Nesta has a lot of trauma from the war, and then also just a lot of guilt about her dad's death. She has been spending a lot of time she has her own little apartment, and she goes out and she drinks and dances and spends a ton of Rhysand's money. So they've decided that if she wants to continue to have a place to live and basically have everything in her life paid for, she has to go train with Cassian at the House of Wind. This training involves physical training to actually learn how to fight, and then also a part-time job at the library where she meets a couple of the friends that she has by the end of the book. She actually gets them to start training with her, and this is where we have the formation of the Valkyries. Nesta and the other Valkyrie end up in this war games. I wish I could remember the name of it, but they have to reach the top of this mountain to win, and it is totally free reign for other warriors to kill them during this competition. And if Cassian tries to get them out, not only will he be killed, but all the Valkyrie will as well. And so the three girls have to fight their way to the top around all these warriors who think that women cannot be warriors, and so they specifically target them. Important characters from these books. Gwyn is one of the Valkyrie, and we think she might be Asriel's love interest if Elaine is actually going to end up with Lucian. We met the Weaver and the Carver, two sort of evil-ish type of people, but evil in a more self-centered way. Like, I don't think they're aligned with Hybern. They're more like, you owe me for this information that I have. Crescent City 1, House of Earth and Blood. We meet Bryce Quinlan, and she is in a more modern fantasy type of world. We've got cell phones, we've got guns, we've got cars, everything. Bryce's best friend is a werewolf who is like brutally murdered alongside her entire pack. Bryce gets thrown into investigating all of their deaths because she knows the most about Danica, which apparently is not knowing very much at all about Danica. He gets paired up with Hunt Athalar, who is a fallen angel. Bryce and Hunt fall in love just in time for Bryce to need to go make the drop into her powers. Danica's voice is there because somehow we are able to talk to people after they're dead in this particular universe, and she gives Bryce the last bit of power that she needs to make it back to the world and not die while she's making the drop. But then we find out all this stuff about Danica that makes Bryce feel like she didn't even know her own best friend. For example, the fact that Micah had been blackmailing Danica to find the horn, and then that Danica had the horn turned into tattoo ink, which is now tattooed onto Bryce. Bryce ends up killing Micah. This is the vacuum scene that is so, like, iconic, is that she turns Micah into dust and then just vacuums him up. And, like, at the end of the book, Bryce and Hunt are almost free, but the archangels have sort of said, like, if you step out of line or you tell what actually went down in this investigation, we will kill you. But Bryce now has her star power, and I'm not exactly sure when in the book. We talked about Bryce actually being related to the Autumn King because Bryce is half fae and half human, but she was raised by two humans, her actual mother and then her dad, who was the sharpshooter, but he's just human. Crescent City 2, House of Earth and Blood. Just as confusing as the first, except we get to know a little bit more about Rune Dannon, and we see he lives in a frat house. Everything being modern just threw me for such a loop. Like, I feel like I understood the world more in Throne of Glass and ACOTAR. And, like, despite the fact that they killed Micah, the archangels are still very much in charge, and they still feel very much under, like, their control. And Hunt is actually enslaved again, which is why Bryce is very much pro joining the rebellion. Rune is talking to this person in his brain named Day, ? She's supposed to be part of the rebellion, and then he's supposed to meet her in person, but he just gets a glimpse of this person called the Hind. Reminder that we have a dragon in our midst, a shapeshifter who I would guess is sort of the same type of shifter that Lysandra is. And then, in my opinion, the main scene that counts here is that Bryce meets the Inner Circle from the ACOTAR series at the very end. They have the Death Trove, they have the harp that Bryce needs that would theoretically allow people to move between realms. So, like, there's obviously, overall, across all the books, there's obviously a reason why these are all said to be in specific realms. Throughout the whole thing, we acknowledge the fact that there are other realms. It's just that our story is taking place in one realm. But we see Selena pass through the ACOTAR realm at the end of Kingdom of Ash, and we see, obviously, the ACOTAR crew show up to Bryce Quinlan's realm at the end of Crescent City 2, and we have this idea that Dorian, Rune, and Rhysand are related. Now, I think the reason we do this is because they have similar personalities, similar looks, but not exactly, and because they're all kings, princes, whatever, within their individual realms. But Rhysand is known for having his, like, purple eyes, whereas Dorian is described as having sapphire eyes, and Rune is described as having blue flame eyes. Now, who do we know that looks a lot like Rhysand, but has blue eyes? That would be Asriel. And the thing is, Dorian, Asriel, and Rune, I think they all have the shadow power. I think Rhysand kind of controls shadows, but Asriel is like our shadow power person. There's also this person that Rune has been talking to, Day, who we think might be the Hind, but we don't know that much about this character, and I've heard theories that it could be Aelin. Also, we have evil creatures in every realm. We have different versions of these creatures, and I think they're one and the same. I saw somebody talking about this on TikTok. I wish I could remember who it was. But they said that the Weaver sounds like the creepy spider from Throne of Glass. If you remember, I think it was Aelin who, like, looked up and there was this spider above her. It was very creepy. But, like, Weaver, spider, I could see those being the same. Do you know what I mean? Like, spiders have to weave their, what is it called? Webs. I truly am expecting Avengers Endgame level of awesomeness. Because we've already seen the Crescent City and ACOTAR universes colliding, and I know none of us really want to disturb Aelin after what she's been through, but if the Asteri are really the Valg and or the gods that she expelled, I feel like we're gonna have to get her help. Obviously, it would have been impossible for us to cover every point that is important to the story, but I hope that was helpful. I think it was at least helpful to me to kind of remember, especially the Throne of Glass series. That has been forever since I've read it. Anything else you can think of, anything that might be important or end up being a crossover between the series, please let me know in the comments. This was a monster of a video. If you made it to the end, thank you for being here. Please like this video if you liked it. Click subscribe if you want to talk about more book stuff. My name's Caitlin. Thanks for watching. Bye.